Both? That's very possible. Very possible. I ain't going to get rid of that. It's obnoxious in your face. We're glad everybody's here today. This is going to be a great presentation we got here. A few things before we get there. We'd like to welcome all the new members here. Who's new members today? We got some sign up. Please introduce yourself real quick.
I'm Andy Benningfield. I'm with School Trust Plan. Not quite a geologist.
Okay, thank you very much. We'd like to recognize all the guests that are here today and also to encourage you to get in there and renew your membership if you haven't done that yet. And if you can think of anybody else that should be a member, grab them and have them sign up with you. We'd like to boost our membership, and it helps with the things we do here, the scholarships, and have a great set of meetings. Real quickly, the map up here on the screen is our update on the Guidebook 48, Geosites of Utah, that we're working on this year. You can see we have a pretty good distribution of sites up here, and we'd like to thank everybody that submitted articles to it. We've got about 145 locations that we're writing up on in here. I hope we haven't created a big monster for us to get it and get done, but we're going to try it anyway, get it out here. But lots and lots of people are participating in it. I think this will be pretty good. It'll be an online publication at first, and we'll move it to a published version. But we're glad everybody's participating in it, and you can see we got good distribution. And I think I look at it, and there's a couple sites we're missing on there, so that's what we're working on right now. I'd like Rick Aylis to come up if he would for a minute. Rick's retiring from the director of the UGS at the end of the month, and his 10 years here, he's helped the UG out quite a bit. We can work on stuff, we can do all these things as part of the program here, so he's made a significant contribution to the Utah Geological Association. So we'd like to give him an honorary membership to the association for all your work. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Done a lot of work.
Retired actually ties in with what you see on the screen here, and that is getting better signage of geological information out on locations. Starting actually, because I'm involved with the Forge geothermal project, and down there, if you know the valley, the North Milford Valley, it's got all the renewables there, geothermal, solar, including traditional and integral transmission lines. A wonderful place, say, for school kids to go on a bus trip and tour around, but there's minimal signage, and it's just crying out for people to get close to solar panels and realize the issues with solar, with wind, with geothermal, with Forge, as well as the old stuff. And in fact, just in the last few weeks, Pacific Oil has thrown $10,000 towards signage. The Office of Energy Development has thrown in $10,000 of seed funding. So, and we have a few others, and Beaver County have said their economic person, Scott Albrecht, has said he's prepared to coordinate it. In fact, the commissioners said, go for it. It sounds fantastic. So there'll be signs there, signage so people can go there and learn a bit more about the energy forms. And it seems to me, looking at this, there's an opportunity for the UGA to get involved on the side. When you think of all the trails, the parks and wildlife have, there's some phenomenal, something like 70,000 miles of trails in Utah for ATVs. So there's got to be places along there where you have great vistas, where a sign showing what geological thing they're looking at, just increasing awareness. So it seems to me there's a great opportunity.
Well, we talked with Marjorie quite a bit about that. Thank you. If you were here last month with Marjorie, she talked a lot about this geoconservation, and a lot of these sites will lend themselves to that. So we can't pick 150 of them, but certainly we can do some. In fact, there was one that we were talking about down that's the slick and slides off the Hurricane Fault. As you're coming out of Hurricane towards the top, there's a great panel of slick and slides. I've probably had 50 field trips there with BYU and everything else going through there. So they're doing road construction through there in the next 5 years. So that's kind of a project, is conserving those and having a fault related, some sort of geosite right there associated with it. So yeah, that lends itself greatly to that. We're also going to have our golf tournament in September, and we're looking for somebody that would sort of be the chair of that golf tournament. So if you've got a good golf swing and you like to help out with that, please contact one of us. We'd like to get that moving on. It's the proceeds from the golf tournament go into our scholarship fund. And so it makes a big difference on putting out our field camp scholarships and other geologic related scholarships that we have in the UGA. Just a reminder also, the lunches are now $10. So if you note that, just a little introduction there. Is there any other announcements? Wait, yes. Well, stand up so we can hear you. So I can barely hear you.
If you're interested, AET is having their monthly meeting this Thursday the 13th, 5:30 to 7:30 at Red Robin on Foothill. And the speaker is Mike Den, Sanchez, Vice President of Mining, and he's going to be speaking on the reclamation of the Holden mine located in north central Washington. So you don't have to be a member of AET, though. They ask for a $5 donation, and I think it's anyway, AET Thursday, 5:30 to 7:30 at Vermont.
Okay. One last note. We have a new article that came out in the Jelly Intermountain West. Tom, you want to stand up and just tell them what it is? I can't remember the title.
Well, title is on the Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry. And that's because the editor of this, some great job this year. Published 13 articles. We thought we'd have maybe 2 a year. We've got 13 this year, and Doug is trying to tell us that this editor is going to get 4 more out this month.
Yeah, maybe that's a fever speaking.
The majority of the articles that we had,
they're tough to read, though, aren't they?
Anyway, we referred word is getting out there.
Free, and they're free articles.
And they don't have to be just really word. I think I had one last year on protected and we encourage anybody else. Don't even home. Well, anyway, it's still caught on.
Yeah, so if you have an article you'd like to submit, please contact us. We'd like to go over. They're going to be very technical and got good editors working on it. So it'd be a good place to publish. So on that note, we'll turn the time over to Greg for the introduction of our speaker.
Can you hear me now? Okay, today's speaker is Ralph J. Stegen. Ralph is the Vice President of Mine and Exploration for Freeport McMoran, based in Tucson, Arizona. He is responsible for the exploration and resource modeling functions at Freeport's operating and closed properties in North and South America. Prior to this role, he was Chief Geologist at Morecci and Tyrone for Phelps Dodge, and previously worked on various base and precious metal exploration programs in Utah, Colorado, Nevada, and New Mexico. While an undergraduate student, he worked for the Utah Geological and Mineral Survey as a field assistant, principally for helmet doling. That's a dinosaur, right? On the Box Elder and Garfield County reports. His mineral experience started with work as a mine geologist on the Ontario mine in Park City, later with the exploration at the Deer Trail mine in Marysville District, Utah. He also was an exploration geologist for the Cuesta Porphyro molybdenum deposit, New Mexico, and at the Gold Strike District, Utah. I'll hand that over down to Ralph.
Can't multitask. I'll just hold it. Well, thanks. Is this on? Oh, okay. So talk about the Pine Grove porphyry moly deposit, Beaver County. You're looking at me puzzled.
I can't hear you through the mic.
So.
Podium's on, yeah.
Okay. Sorry for this. Anyway, if I can see the screen. Pine Grove is in Beaver County. Obviously, St. George, Cedar, Beaver, Milford. You go west, and then Pine Grove's situated here, 53 kilometers more or less west of Milford. It was discovered in 1974, so fairly recent. Named for a small valley in the southern Wawas. I got a photo of that. If you haven't seen it, it's quite a lovely place. The thing that's somewhat interesting about Pine Grove is its porphyry moly system relatively by itself. So if you think about other things around there aren't a lot of other things that have been firmly identified as porphyry moly system. Some might argue that there might be something at Marysville, but remains to be seen. This is Pine Grove. You can see it's a pinon juniper forest, some perennial stream there. It's actually a very nice place. I don't think people realize how wonderful it really is. Southern part of the Wawas. Geologic setting. Pine Grove's right here. These are Proterozoic and Cambrian quartzite and shale, some limestone that's folded into a syncline. The axial plane is right here. Some Oligocene volcanic rocks, the Needles Range 4 formation and so forth are right here, and then some Miocene age emplacement of the Pine Grove stock. There's some colloidal volcanics that Jeff Keith did a nice job talking about. If you're interested, my talk won't go into too much about that aspect of the deposit, but would reference his work if you're interested more on that. The other thing, there's some NEA gene-aged normal faults. They have east-west and northeast trends. Foliation measurements of these flows 15 to 25 degrees northeast. And Pine Grove itself, if one assumes it was in place, vertically is now inclined about 70, indicating that this part of the range has probably been tilted 25 degrees or so. Mining history, prospected earliest records are 1873, sat dormant for a couple years and was reorganized in 1879. Most of the production are from two mines. This is one of them called Tasso, and the other one is a Lou mine. They principally were mining silver, lead, zinc from veins, breccia bodies. You can see the production. This is from a report that Perry and McCarthy did, open file, UGMS report 1977. The thing that's interesting is the U.S. Bureau of Mines, as part of the war studies, and when it went underground and actually evaluated the potential for mineralization in the Tasso, one of the interesting things about the Pine Grove areas is these breccia pipes, pebble dikes and breccia bodies. And they show these on figures, but they never described them. And so it was a large source of the ore. It is interesting because you can find fragments on this dump, quartz moly veins and porphyry fragments. So not too subtle clue what might be lurking at depth. A little bit about the exploration. I put two slides here because there's two really important things. One of them is the rhyolite stock actually crops out. It's in the base of the valley. I mean, you drive up there, it's pretty obvious. It's prominent. You can see the porphyritic texture. In places you can find garnets, which was critical in terms of the exploration history. The other thing you can see are these pebble dikes. If you look closely, these are rounded fragments of porphyry, a large part of them. They're heterolithic, but a larger part of these are porphyry with quartz moly veins inside, right at the surface. So it was just, the deposit was discovered in 1974. Phelps Dodge sent a team of geologists in to follow in to look at some of these base metal veins, thinking that there might be an association with base metal veins for a porphyry system of some sort. I don't think they were necessarily looking for moly. They might have thought about copper as well. The mapping indicated the presence of garnet being in the stock. And so there was some work done. Most of you might have heard of the gentleman by the name of Sid Williams. He was a contract petrographer in Douglas, and he did some petrography, some follow-up surface sampling, indicated similarities of the garnet. And there's one right here. These tend to be deep red as phenocrysts within the rhyolite porphyry. So drawing on similarities to what we see in the upper part of the Henderson system. Some more work indicated through mapping some QSP, although it's not very well developed there, but there's a lot of argillic, there's base metal veins, rhodochrosite veins. Whole rock geochemistry indicated that the rhyolite was probably high silica rhyolite, so they drilled a hole in 1975 and banged into the side of it. Followed up with three more holes that really intersected the bulk of the deposit. It went to a joint venture in '78 with Getty. Some more drilling was done at the surface, essentially to delineate what they could do at the surface. And these holes go down 6,000 feet. So it's not really a shallow deposit. The top of the ore shell is 900 meters below the surface. And the result of that study indicated that the deposit needed to be delineated through shaft access and drips. There was some work done on setting the location for the shaft. There was some wide, thick core holes drilled, but then in the early 80s, as most of you might remember, the moly market collapsed, put on hold, and it's still on hold. So, moving on to the district geology, the deposit, the key things here, the deposit situated here within these Proterozoic and Paleozoic rocks. One of the key things is these, you can't really see, but are remnants of, or not remnants, actually the expression of the pine grove stock in the valley. The thing to note are these palpal dikes. A lot of these have westerly or northwest trends. Some of these, most of those contain fragments of quartz molybdenite in altered porphyry. The complex is quite complex. There's 5 several phases it did vent, and that was Jeff Keith's work, indicated by the presence of the coeval volcanics about 10 kilometers to the east. And that resulted in the formation of blonde wash. And so the thing that's interesting, I'll just make a quick note about there's garnets in those volcanic rocks as well, and some of the probe work that he did rendered them indistinguishable. I don't remember what the elements were from the garnets within the pine grove stock. So a very nice study. Moving on to the intrusive complex, it flares. I don't have a very good photo, but you can see that, I mean an image, but the stock or the complex flares. There's not a lot of sills, not a lot of dikes associated with it. Most of the stuff is in the stock itself. So this is Prospect Mountain, Canyon quartzite. Those really are, you can be adjacent to, you can be in those rocks adjacent to the stock and you would never know it. I mean, there's just no visible evidence of any mineralization within that. And that's manifest also by the lack of dikes in these rocks too. I mean, there's dikes within the stock, absence of sills. The several phases, I mean, the early one is what's called the east end. That's a remnant of this. So you got to think that this thing originally, a lot of part of it has been eroded. This probably flared up as well. That's the oldest one, and then within that are several others. And then there's 2 that are key, phase 4 and 5. And a large part of those were separated based on the character of the quartz phenocrysts and some of the feldspar. You know, in looking at some of this, some of the quartz phenocrysts are smoky, some are broken, some are glomeomorphic, some are weakly resorbed. You know, to separate phase 4 and 5 to me is equivocal. It's very difficult. I mean, if you work in systems in Colorado, the Henderson, the Climax system, for example, you can't tell the stocks apart because the mineralogy is so similar, the textures are so similar. That's why over there they've used things like UFTs, these sort of unidirectional fluidification textures found at these stock margins that help you discern one stock from another. But really, to stand there and look at this stuff is really a challenge. I'm just saying at that. The thing about Pine Grove, there's no UFT. So you don't see the plumose features, brain rock, those sorts of things, high silica zones, these sort of things that we typically use elsewhere to help separate these things out. So this is what they look like. I just picked some of the stuff that has a spatial or genetic relationship to the ore shell. You can see it's clearly a porphyritic rock. These are actually quite difficult photographs. It brings the different minerals out because they're so light colored. But you can see some of the quartz looks like it's glommed together. Some of these are weakly resorbed. These are feldspars. Some of those have been replaced by sericite within a really aphanitic ground mass. The entire stalk is porphyritic. We don't see photophases, don't see a lot of aplite, don't see seriate, don't see a lot of equigranular or holocrystalline rocks. So, I mean, if you take this analog to the Henderson or to a Climax system. Stu Wallace used to always say, till you hit the holocrystalline or echogranular rocks, you haven't tested it. So these are all porphyritic rocks, and it's conceivably still open at depth, which is pretty interesting to have such a verticality, but the textural variations are really not dramatic or significant. So part of the thing was, well, what's the age? I mean, there's some potassium argon work based on the stock complex itself. We've done a lot of work, a lot of the deposits in Arizona with the copper molybdenum systems have heritage potassium argon dates. And Freeport we've been involved pretty extensively with the University of Arizona getting actually uranium-lead zircon dates because of the issues with subsequent intrusions, including these things that have been dated. What happens to those dates? Are they reset? Those sorts of features. And so this was part of what was done here. Again, principally through Mark Barton and graduate students there. Standard techniques, they target the cores and rims of the individual zircon grain. And this is what we came up with. So obtained zircon separates from 3 different intrusions. Samples were based on the composition in relation to the hypogene mineralization alteration. Dates are consistent with the cross-cutting relationships as much as we can tell. That's a nice way to validate. The MO mineralization is related to these, and from what we can see, there's a, whoops, excuse me. Okay, now I've got myself in a mess here. Anyway, there's a mafic rock deep. This was some of the Phelps Dodge, the Getty geologists termed it a tonalite. I don't know if I'd call it a tonalite because it's so altered here. There's phenocrystal plagioclase, phenopyroxene hornblende biotite in a dark aphanetic ground mass, and with all the chloritic and aceracitic alteration. I don't know if I know modes enough to say what the rock is. I just called it a mafic rock. The thing about it is the age relationship of the stock, it indicates, at least with these dates, it might be older. The trouble is it's deep. You see it in isolated drill holes. The drill hole spacing is quite wide. And the mafic rocks are all bounded by fault. So probably older, don't know. You know, so it's not uncommon to see these in these rhyolitic systems, but really based on the dates that we got here, really the mineralization is about 25 MA, which is older than the potassium argon date. Jeff did get a date on the stage on the phase 5, and his date was about 24. So pretty close. I don't have an explanation for the younger dates. I can think of some reasons, but I'm not going to go into that now. But based on uranium lead zircon, that's what we have. The other thing to note are the presence of pebble dikes and some breccia. They're quite widespread in the stock. We've identified those through relogging to depths of about 600 meters. They all have steep dips. They generally dip inward to the system. The fragment lithologies are mostly porphyry. If they're proximal to quartzite, you might get some of that. I mean, that sort of thing. But basically, the matrix is rock, flour, quartz, sericite, fluorite, rhodochrosite, and some pyrite. So you can see these are classic sort of things. These are from core. Apologize, I don't have a scale bar on there, but 1 centimeter would be about like this. You can see this one's heterolithic. And then the alteration. large part of this from the talk. So the alteration zone outward from the moly ore shell, there's an inward zone of quartz that would be A veins, if you like, the Gustafson and Hutt way of talking about stuff, and they're cut by quartz moly K-splar veins, quartz topaz pyrite wolfenite veins, sericitic or philic, if you rather use that, which is actually minor. It's a minor constituent to the alteration. And then there's a widespread quartz argillic base metal carbonate sequent high. That tends to have spatially close to where the garnet. So you're seeing when the early exploration, the garnet was observed as phenocryst, but also rhodochrosite, some of these other veins. Some had fluorite, but there's deep alteration as well. And what we see are thin moly veins, some as paint. You know what I mean by that? Just paint on fractures that cut these sequences. So you got to think these are more high temperature, gradually becoming lower and lower. If you get a veinlet that cuts that, well, what's that related to? These are the things that Eric Seedorf talked about at Henderson, where he called veinlet reversals. We see that here. It's not as common as what he talked about at Henderson, but they are here. And there's an ill-defined quartz topaz pyrite wolfenite shell deep. There's also sericitic argillic on top of that that overprints some of the stuff higher. And so this is an image here. You can see this is QSP. There's just some quartz moly veins that cuts a quartz vein. It's pretty complicated, but the thing to note about the quartz moly or the veins is that the lack of halos. They're mostly just fractured fills and veinlets. So a little bit detail about each one. The earliest are quartz veins. We think they're in the apical part of the stage 5 stock. Early, there's no high silica zones here, so you're not going to be obliterated by that. Here's an image of that. You can see they're basically just quartz only veins cut by this cute little quartz moly veinlet here. Several generations, they have irregular walls. Oftentimes they're wavy. Moving on to the QMF, or the quartz moly feldspar veins. There are multiple generations. One of the things that's accessories you might find interesting is scheelite. And there's some fluorite there as well, which is not that uncommon. Halos or quartz K-splar biotite, they're underwhelming in terms of how wide they are. They're very thin. So, I mean, you can see here several generations, this, cut by this, cut by this, and all of that cuts. Here's a quartz vein there. So if you're looking for big, wide halos, not the place. So again, getting back to the moly veins, multiple generations. Oldest veins are thin. They look like replacement veins, and they're wavy. Don't have halos. They're cut by later planar veins. So the progression of the moly mineralization through time, wavy, planar to really planar veins with moly as relic tracks along veinlet margins. And they all have moderate to steep dips. They're somewhat analogous to these radial veins that we see in the other systems. We don't have concentric veins here. And the last thing is that we get ribbon veins. I'll show those. Those are composite veins of what looks to be multiple quartz moly veins within a single veinlet. Some of those are quite wide and they're steep. They cut everything. And again, a later phase of quartz moly fluorite that overprints that. Quartz topaz pyrite. This is the source of the tungsten and tin. So these are Veinlets, the veinlets are mostly quartz, topaz, with pyrite, thin halos of sericite. Wolframite is generally associated with topaz. Some limited probe work indicated that, like I said, they have QSP, tin associated with these. And so here's some topaz. You can see these little fine dark masses. Those are wolframite. So I use the term wolframite as a group name. I don't have probe data on everything, so I don't know if it's hubnerite or whatever, so I just call it wolframite. But I put this in here. This is from Climax. So this is kind of gives you a sense of what these veinlets really look like in other places. You can see that there's moly on the side here and quartz, and the topaz is the white that stands out, fairly clear. These dark minerals here are wolframite and then the pyrite. So in this case, the QTP is reoccupied a quartz moly vein, and then the halo of sericite is related to the QTP vein. And then above the sericitic, I think most people know what that is. Here's some photos of that. We see veinlets of quartz pyrite with halos of QSP. It's really underwhelming in its occurrence. It's really not as we see it there. It could have been higher, but it's not really that well developed. Pine grove's a pretty low total sulfide system. In some cases, the pyrite content is really 1 to 2%. It's really low, you know. So you didn't, for whatever reason, generate a profound QSP zone. Above that are quartz argillic base metal carbonate, principally as veinlets. They extend from the moly ore shell to the surface. They have these sorts of clays associated. The kaolinite decreases with depth, but it's not uncommon to see this assemblage proximal to the surface within the stock. So just some photos to show you what the moly mineralization looks like. I think the thing to get from this is the multiple generations unraveling that. You can see this wavy character like I talked about. Look how planar these things are. Here's another one with some real planar veins. You can see how the moly tends to be localized in some way along the veinlet margins. Some of the irregularities that you see on some of these are related to the moly actually reacting with the host rock, where it tends to replace feldspar and doesn't do much with quartz. So here's a quartz moly vein, probably a composite vein. So you can see in your mind's eye there probably could have been several individual quartz veins with moly along railroad tracks within this mafic rock. So that's a host rock. And then these are the ribbon veins that I was talking about, where you see these, so the vein is right here. The image isn't very good, but a vein here, but there's a multiple set of probably quartz moly veins that constitute this veinlet. So they're really composite veins of veinlet that tend to dip steeply. So moving on to what the moly mineralization is, it's a single ore shell. The upper part is an inverted cup and then extends along the margin. So really, if you think of this as a cylinder-like mass, the ore shell is developed outward and above it, right? So it surrounds a low-grade core. So these features are defined on 0.06, 0.12, 0.18% MO, not MOS2, %MO. So if you use the MOS2, remind you the conversion is about 60% to get %MO. And you can see the character of what this is. This is about 900 meters from the surface. Higher grades typically are localized along the flanks, not at the top, but along the flanks And this, we believe this is related to a higher density of these valence. It's not an overprint of something else or two ore shells. It's really just an overprint. And then the mineralization, like I inferred, probably open at depth. So here's a series of cross sections so you can get a sense moving through the deposit what it looks like. So these are north-south. They're spaced 400 feet apart. You can see the scale right here. So this would be on the west side. View is to the east. So we're on the west side of the cylinder. It looks like the ore shell is extending down. We move east. You can see this is pretty high grade here, pretty high grade here. So from an underground mining point of view, you're going to block cave this. This is pretty nice because you have a large column height and it's subvertical. Pretty good. People at Henderson think you need at least 400 feet to do a decent cave, at least. Higher is better. So you can see how this deposit would lend itself when that day comes to probably a decent block cave operation. And the next phase, you can see moving east. Reasonably well behaved, at least at this level of drilling. Again, it's a consistent theme, the higher grades along the flanks, not at the top, not as an overprint. This is, again, shows these variations in mineralization grade and character. The next, so by this section, 400 feet, you were out of it. So that's why I didn't show the other one. But these are actually original, probably 1982 drill hole traces are what you can see here that base this interpretation on. So, okay, so what is Pine Grove? What is it, just a one-off wonder, or what is it? Some have called it subclimax type, a transitional, it's a climax type, rhyolitic, Pine Grove type, whatever, right? So I'm going to go quickly through some other deposits in Colorado. You can kind of get a sense. Here's Denver. This is the Colorado Mineral Belt. Boulder, Idaho Springs, the carbonate-hosted Montrose systems at Leadville, Aspen, Gilman, and just the diverse array of the magnetism. So I've shown here the three actual deposits, Henderson, Climax, Mount Emmons. The blue X's are prospects. Turquoise Lake, Central City, you name it, they're probably here. They tend to be older. There's been a lot of work done trying to identify these, but it's obviously a moly-rich environment to get such an array of prospects and world-class deposits within a localized belt. So how big are these things? So I just looked at the endowment. This is production, reserves, mineralized material, or in other words, SEC sort of terms. So a lot of these are free port operations and stuff in southern Arizona. So you can see that Climax is basically what, 1.2 billion tons of 0.17, 4.3 billion pounds of moly. It's pretty big. Henderson's half of that size. Emmons, you can see what that is. But then the other thing to point out, look at these. The co-product or byproduct moly in some of the deposits in Arizona and elsewhere are huge. One could argue that Morenci has almost as much as Climax does. So if you think about the things that impact moly-only deposits, it's challenging because a lot of the places, there's one right over the valley here that cranks a lot of moly out. And so they're going to be doing that. And so part of the thing with how Freeport runs their moly business, principally this one and this one, they're not at capacity, and they mine to what they have contracts for. So the contracts, if you look at the moly spot price, you see a price, but there's premiums on top of that based on the quality of the concentrate. So Henderson, for example, is very clean. There's not a lot of minerals in there. There's not a lot of stuff that you got to get out. So basically, the concentrate is basically molybdenite. And it's valued by users because of the purity. And because of that, they get a premium in terms of the market that they can sell to. Climax, by contrast, is pretty dirty. And what I mean by dirty is the overprint there. There's a lot of galena, sphalerite, bismuth, very minerals that occur as veins. There's also chalcopyrite and bornite with the molybdenite in veins. You got to get all of that out if you want to sell a product and realize a decent price. So there's a lot of emphasis to do that. Whereas a lot of these deposits, at least in Arizona, the moly that they sell is what they produce through their mill, and they probably get a lower price. So for a deposit like Climax or Henderson to be competitive, because this stuff is swamping, we produce more byproduct moly than we do single source. We got to be good at what we do, or we're not going to be around, because we don't have the byproducts, the other thing to help us get there. And all I got to say is you wonder about the Mount Hopes and the Thompson Creeks in the world, and good luck. I mean, it's tough. It's tough market. So we are not at capacity. And the thing that strikes me, some would argue we have some of the best moly deposits in the world, and we can't produce at full capacity for the market. It's just what the reality is. My phone, what a great time to call that. So anyway, so what are the characteristics if you look at Climax, Henderson, Mount Emmons, and Pine Grove? What's the age? Well, you can see the age. One of the things that we've, well, they're really persistent. Climax, through some uranium lead zircon works, 27. Henderson's 28. Mount Emmons is about 16, Pine Grove 25. Can't really read this. And then, so what's the host rock? High still rhyolite, how many intrusive centers? You can read that. Pebble dikes associated with volcanic rocks. It's been a recent work in Colorado that indicates it might be intrusive. Equivalent of Henderson is Fraser, if you know where that is, north and northwest of Henderson. Blonde formation here, not anything recognized. There might be one for Climax. What's the duration? It's probably about 1 million years or younger, really. And what's the other moly that's associated? Redwell Basin is a little bit younger at 15. Real quick on the petrochemistry of these. They basically all cluster. If you look at silica versus Climax, Stock Mountain, that's the topaz rhyolite near Climax. Henderson is the purple with extrusive volcanic rock. Emmons is this. Pine Grove is the orange. The same thing here. These, they vary with these contents, but basically you can see some similarities. What's some of the magnetic hydrothermal features of these things? Do they have high silica zones? That's the high silica zones beneath the ore shell. Obviously, Climax and Henderson do. Emmons doesn't. Emmons actually has magnetite. They have high silica. Pine Grove doesn't have any. USC is everybody's favorite rock. They're abundant at Henderson. They occur here. Maybe there's not. QTP, I talked about that. That's pretty extensive and all. That's the presence of wolframite and tin, multiple ore shells. Are they high grade? Yep. Yep. And what sort of features concentric radial veins, stockwork veins, and the like? What's some of the mineralogy characteristics of these things? They have fluorite, yep. Rhodochrosite, yep. Garnet, check. Topaz, it's abundant in two, it occurs in the other. Wolframite, yep. Associated tin minerals, mostly considerite and danite. What other things do we see? These are sort of local things. One of the things that is common actually is bismuth, bearing minerals in different work that we've been doing that climax to identify some calcium chloride, hydroxide, predite. Some cases there's pyrrhotite, tourmaline, and beryl are common at Emmons, scheelite, bismuthinite, tesserae, sort of thing. Here's a view of Emmons, the vein that is Marnie, the couple of the back of the ore shell. Anyway, the silver lead zinc vein, you can see the complexity of moly grades related to the two of the stocks here. And this is what they look like at the same scale. So you can ponder that. You know, the typical association that you read about is this form. It's manifest here. This is an overprint of a lot of different moly shells at Henderson, right? But one thing in common is proximal to the source intrusion. They have high grades. They can be overprinted in this case by a vertical array of intrusions. This one is more spread out. And then there's Pine Grove, which is a little bit different. The thing that's interesting, actually, the top of the Pine Grove system is about the same. So it's not at depths that are outrageous. And someday somebody's going to probably do something with it, but not in the foreseeable future. I think here's the summary, real quick. Multiple phases, porphyritic textures are the common type of texture we see there. Two phases, one moly ore shell, a lot of multiple generations, sort of cross-cutting veinlets with moly. There's a lot going on in the ore shell. It manifests as that, but I think there's a lot going on. QTP is common. And from my view, it looks like a climax type moly system. I think that's all I had. Yep. Any questions? Go through one of my notes or something.
I got a lot of questions.
Okay, go for it.
Do climax and Henderson?
Yeah. Yeah, there's veins related to both. That's peripheral. At climax, one of the deepest stocks actually has base metals associated with them that overprinted one of the ore shells. And these are veins that are like this. Galena salarite vein. Some of the, well, it's a pain in the neck for us now. We've got to get rid of it. But there's a couple small vein mines. These are in Proterozoic rocks, so they didn't really generate a lot of tons, but basically underwhelming. The biggest one is at Emmons. That was the Keystone vein. That was a fairly significant producer. But I think 2 to 3 million tons. Silver lead zinc.
Thanks, Rob. So, do the In the mapping rock, do you see muddy veins develop in that?
Yeah, it's
And
absolutely,
good chronology?
Yep. Same host. It's indistinguishable in terms of the valent types. It's just, Jeff, it's deep, and we just have holes here, holes there, and it's in this hole and not in this hole, and this hole, and it's not in this hole. But the drill spacing is such that they're all bounded by fault. So I don't know what really the relationship is. We think it's older, but I can't prove that.
Well, I mean, there a lot of these deposits have more than one. Yeah.
Right.
I think there's another one in Pine Grove.
Yeah, and the evidence to support that is lower. There's a cute quartz topaz pyrite wolframite shell, and it's cut by thin moly paint on fractures. And the stock is all porphyritic. It's not even seriate. So that would argue you have not tested the extent of the system at depth. Now, if you want to, I mentioned it, Jeff, drill a 9 to 10,000 foot hole, go for it. That's probably because the depth of the drilling now is fixed.
Bill Randa and Art Rutten at Mount Emmons to treat the iron oxide with bullseye like a target dead.
Well, the thing we see at Pine Grove is more manganese, not really goethite, jarosite. There's some in veins, but it's a lot of stockwork. So you can't do like Spence talked about smudge tests and stuff with these valence because the amount of no lease cap. You know, so if you take the Emmons example, the QSP actually cropped out, and you can see that. And it's variations of girthitic capping. There's not really any enrichment because there's no copper, and there's jarositic, and a lot of part of that is probably after pyrite. So you can map the intensities. But yeah, but at Pine Grove, it's more manganese is probably related to rhodochrosite, I think. I don't know. Good question. I wasn't part of any of that. I would suspect it would.
It's a normal geothermal grading. The shape of your floor line looks like it's strongly fault controlled, and yet it predates basement range.
You know, Jeff Abbott talked about that. He thinks that there's an east-west fault, the trace of which goes through Pine Valley, that he thinks might have played a role in the localization of it. I mean, you look at that, if that's the case, there's a fabric that you see that's oriented to palpable dikes, they extend outward from that. So there is something. The valley itself is elongated along an east-west trend by itself too. Large part of that could be just the erosion of the stock. The stock is elongated east-west too. So, yeah.
Two geologists that the U.S. have short statements summarizing what we call only is limited. But they argue that there's only 13 the poetry colonies, they're really restricted Western U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any sense of what the tectonic setting was that contributed to the rise of these?
Well, I mean, if you look at the stuff at Pine Grove and in Colorado, climax is 27. The Rio Grande Rift probably is 25. So there's some early phases of maybe extension related in some way to that. Henderson probably there's a large part of Henderson is tilted. It's cut by some younger faults. The Rio Grande doesn't extend up that far. You know, Pine Grove could be 25. What's the earliest extension in that part of Utah? 21 or 22? 25. So, I mean, there's, you know, but then you can say, okay, well, what about Emmons? Well, Emmons doesn't fit. Silver Creek or Rico doesn't fit. So, I mean, there's people have advocated for that. I think there's temporal relationship, sort of, but, you know, I don't know if it's absolute or what. They tend to be a little older than the extension. Those are the things that that people have called brain rock. Have you seen those? They're layers of quartz and K feldspar principally, and then they have crystals. They're terminated on one side. They grow from a substrate, generally in towards the source intrusion. And the thing about them is they tend to form near or at contacts of stocks. So in a place like Henderson, where you can't tell one from the other, you can map these UST zones, and they're manifest as different types and kinds, and kind of give a sense for what stock is which, because very complex. Henderson's got, what, 15 intrusions? There's a nice paper on that by Rick Carton. He talks about how they were used there. There's a lot of attention paid to that. At Climax, there isn't as many of those, and I think in part because the place where they tend to occur is near the upper parts of stocks, and that's where the high silica zone is, and it's probably been replaced by some of that. So, you know, in some places, and I think Pine Grove might be one of them, you get the handlings out and you scratch your head a lot, and at the end of the day, it's equivocal. Really, unless you've got some other means to identify a stock consistently, it can be challenging, just to be honest. So, yeah.
How does Pine Grove compare to the other ones?
Pine Grove is probably the lowest of the four that I showed. Climax is probably 5 to 7. Henderson's probably, I don't know, 3 to 6. Emmons was pretty high with the QSP. A lot of that's oxidized, but some of that was in hornfels. I'd say that probably would rival Climax type. Pine Grove is really low, really low. You know, and you don't see the selvages, you don't see the pyrite veins, you just don't see those things. So, yep. A lot of questions.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to write it out for that matter.
I think our exploration group through the years has wandered through there. We don't do any recent work. I mean, we're awash in Molly. I want to get distinguished with our management, talk about finding more. And so, you know, in addition to Pine Grove, there's Buckingham, Mount Emmons, Big Bend. We don't have that one. But I mean, you can see our shelf is pretty full, so we're in good shape there. There's been a lot of Molly exploration down there, you know, Blonde Wash, Lamador Peak, all these sort of alunite things, Marysvale. I don't know that much has come up. I mean, Ken would probably know more than I would. I mean, is anybody? Yeah. And someday they'll see the light of day. But any other questions?
Well, we'd like to thank Ralph with a gesture of our appreciation. We'll provide him with his selected UGA publication.
Great, thank you.
Geology of the Far South of Utah. Anyhow, thank you all for coming out, and
thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Everybody,
He's still out there, he's still active. Really?